Welcome to this episode of the Best Hopes podcast. I am Adam Frower.
I'm Cecil Walker.
And today we're going to talk a little bit about the difference between optimism and hope. And I think maybe a good place to begin with that is thinking about like what the opposite of those things are. And some might say the opposite of optimism or hope is skepticism or doubt. And so one of the things that I am wondering, Cecil, is when you think about the difference between optimism versus hope, how would you make that distinction?
A big chunk of the distinction that I would make is kind of our past, dozens of conversations we've had on this podcast, on the side of hope, at least, that it makes all of these differences that we've talked about. It's attached to some understanding of the possibility of outcomes. I kind of want to use all the different synonyms that we've come across, in replacing the word hope with. It's all of those things when we're talking about hope. And optimism, to me, feels more like just a colored lens you put over, how you look at things, and says nothing about how you're connecting to the possibilities of things. It's more of a positivity for the situation or something like that. And I don't mean to say it's good or bad, but I don't think it's as substantial as I'm hoping for something. I'm believing in this thing could be the way that things go, or somehow in the end, I get this kind of an outcome. I think optimism feels a little emptier than that. It feels more like, let's just look at it in a positive way. If we go with that half full glass, half empty kind of a thing, that reasoning, though I would describe myself as someone who does focus more on the positive side of things, that reasoning, though, means if the glass is 2/3 empty and 1/3 full, you're still going, well, let's look at it 1/3 full. And if it's 1/8 full, you're going, I still need to look at it 1/8 full and not 7/8 empty. I don't know that functions for everyone in the same way that hope can function for people, as just look at it in a positive way. Look at the other side of what's happening and find some sense of positivity in that and use that positivity. I think that's a very, very different thing than, regardless of what's happening, what do you hope will happen? What's the outcome you're putting some type of belief into and some type of effort into? What's the thing you could attach some type of hypothetical processing toward to make yourself feel, act, and operate differently, in these current circumstances?
Yeah, I think you made a really important distinction between a view or perspective of something versus a function of something. Mm-hmm. And I think when you look at just the perspective side or the view of something, I can see why some people might correlate optimism and hope. You're looking for the best in a situation. Mm-hmm. You're perceiving something that is worthwhile or something worth aiming at. But when you get down to function, when you look at just optimism, the optimism of function may be to feel better, to, be positive about something. Whereas the function of hope, I would say, and in a lot of the conversations that we've had, it's about action. Mm-hmm. It's what action will produce that. Yeah. If it's about expectancy, then my expectancy is I behave in a way that says I'm expecting this outcome.
Exactly.
And so I think that is a really useful distinction between just perception or view versus the function of something. But when you bring in I don't know if we've ever thought about this before or overtly talked about it, the opposite of optimism would be skepticism or doubt or whatever. When you think about the opposite of hope, does skepticism or doubt, does that fit? Or do they not fit? I guess what's your thought about that?
Do those fit into this distinction that we're talking about?
Yeah. Oftentimes people conflate optimism and hope.
Right.
And therefore the opposite of both would be skepticism or doubt.
Yeah.
Is skepticism or doubt really the opposite of hope? Or is it just the opposite of optimism? Where does it lie?
Somehow that's a harder question because I've spent less time, I think, trying to understand the function of doubt than I have the function of hope. But I do think there's room for that similar kind of distinction of action in the perspective that, like you were just describing. I think if hope changes the way that you engage with the situation that you're in, and meaning, like we talked a lot about ambition, and that you can just feel, here's all the action that kind of comes with that. Here's the way that I interact with the world in a different kind of way when I'm riding on ambition. I think the same could happen with doubt. That changes how you're going to interact with the world. As far as if it's the opposite, I mean, it kind of feels that way. I don't know how to do the math on it. It does feel like the gains you would have from being more ambitious and being hopeful are the losses you would have for being doubtful, for thinking it's not worth putting in the effort. And I kind of similarly think if you're skeptical, that's kind of like feeling like, I don't know, that you're not seeing what could be there to see. And that, to me, also feels like, I think your original question was, do these things correlate since they're opposites? And I guess my simple answer is yes. But I think it feels like to invest in those kinds of perspectives gives you negative returns. They give you probably the inverse of what you want. If you do see the situation that you're in a negative way, you don't want that to be the way that it goes. You want it to go a different kind of a way. But I think the best shot you have at things changing for the better is to believe that they can change for the better. Rather than to doubt that, rather than to say, I don't see the things that are there that could help me, move beyond this, or that could tell me that this situation could turn into a better situation. I get that that's a bit of a catch-22, is like, if you want something, believe that it's there and start to see the things that could get you there. But as opposed to the alternative of don't see those things, only see what tells you the opposite, only see what tells you you're far away from the outcome that you want. I don't know, it feels like an easy choice to me. I'd rather believe and see and go in this direction that kind of leads with hope than the other direction that feels like the easy way out of saying, I'm just doubtful. End of story.
If, and maybe just one other like opposite question, even though this is an unusual, we don't usually have this opposite kind of conversation. Is there anything inherently different between skepticism and doubt and hopelessness?
Are you saying these three things as distinctly different things?
I'm saying, are they different? This is a quiz. And
I think so. I try to say things that I feel like can be kind of pushed and understood universally, but I don't know if they can or not. Someone can get a podcast and say what they want to say. I do think so. Skepticism, doubt, and hopelessness. Sure, they can fit in the same person in a given moment. But as far as being separate, distinct things, I do think they are different things. Someone who is skeptical, like I said, that says something about how they're surveying the circumstance. They're saying, here's what I see, here's what I don't see. And what I see is this negative stuff. There's these signs that are telling me this is bad, or that the good is unlikely. Someone who is doubtful, I feel like, is beginning to take action on their skepticism, action on here's what the situation is telling me. And so now I'm beginning to, instead of engaging in the act of, I'm hoping for this, I'm ambitious for this, I'm expecting this, all this stuff we've talked about, they're engaging in the opposite of, here's what I actually think will happen. I'm doubting the good and saying that some of the bad is actually what's going to happen. And I think it's the same kind of distinction we were talking about between being optimistic and hopeful, probably, since those are opposites. But then it feels like there's another layer of depth to it when you get to hopelessness, which to me feels like not just an analysis of what things look like right now, an analysis of the probability of things. It feels like it's even beyond that. It's saying what I think I could want, I don't even think is worth wanting. I don't even think the possibility of my desires for these outcomes is even worth beginning to invest in or beginning to believe in, beginning to any of these words that we've, juggled around over the last several episodes, it feels like if you're in a place of hopelessness, you're not paying effort into that process at all of the things that we've talked about. And that feels even further away than just doubtfulness.
It's interesting because as you were talking, what came to my mind was almost like skepticism being, again, kind of like a perception, a way of viewing something. Doubt moving into belief. Like I believe this to be true, or I believe that not to be true, or I think that can't be. So it's moved from just perception to belief.
Right.
And then hopelessness is then the lack of action based off of the belief. And I think when we think about it in that way, this is really unusual for us to be talking about the opposite of hope, but I think there's something really educational about looking at it, because then we see hopefulness could impact my perception. It could impact my belief. It could impact my action. And so I think what it does when we look at all of these like different gradations is that it's almost a testament to me of like the power of hope, that it can touch the way I see things. It can touch the things that I believe are possible. It can change it's almost like that expectancy that I have. And then it also changes my behavior, my action. It becomes consistent with my perception and my beliefs. And so we've talked about so many different slices of hope, but I think in talking about the opposites of these things, it's really kind of highlighting for me that hope is this really grand concept or principle in that it really has the power to influence everything from thought and perception all the way to action. And I think that's something then really worthwhile, because then we could almost start in any one of those places. I could change my action and know if I behave in a place of hope, it's going to impact the belief that I have. Or vice versa. I can start with changing what I believe, and that's going to change the way that I behave. Or you could add in, if I change my perception, if I take a hopeful perspective, if I look at something and I say, it's possible for that thing to be true, or it's possible for that thing to change into something that I want it to be, that can then change the rest of kind of what I call like the waterfall, I guess, of like it trickles down to all of these other places. And I don't know if we've ever kind of taken a step back and said, hope really has the power to influence the whole spectrum of possibilities.
Yeah, I think that's why it has so much here to talk about, that we've continued to kind of keep diving and expanding on the aspects of it, the function of it, and all of these things, is because it feels kind of universal in that way, or that it has access to change and affect all these different parts of the circle of how we are kind of engaging with things, what we think, what we believe, and how we maybe literally will act. The question I have, though, is, can you have varied amounts of all of these different things simultaneously? Can I have some skepticism but also be hopeful? Can I be optimistic but doubtful? Can I have my hand in several of these little different things all at the same time? Do you think that's possible?
Again, that's a hard question, because I think it's my personal opinion. But hopefully my personal opinion is backed up with some previous understanding. I would say those things might all exist on various continuums, right? Like I have more optimism, less skepticism, or more skepticism, more optimism, more hope, less hopelessness, or vice versa. So I do kind of view them as being on continuum. So it's hard to say like, where's the line between have and have not? But I think that I guess the way that I would say it is, it's kind of the way that I perceive it is about orientation. It's which way am I looking? If you view that continuum kind of like a train track, I'm standing looking down the train track one direction or the other. If I put it on that like optimism versus skepticism train track, I'm either looking at down the optimistic track, or I'm looking down the skepticism track. I might be at a very low place. I might be in skepticism territory, but if I turn around and I start to say, could there be something different than this? Or what might there be out there that I could look at and say, man, that seems like a good option? Then inherently I start to move in that direction. And so I don't think that you can like be actively engaged in both, but I think you could be in one place and oriented one way or the other. Similarly with like hope and hopelessness, I don't know if you could simultaneously feel hope and hopeless, but I think that you could orient yourself to, I feel really hopeless. I think we see this all the time in our work. Like this thing that has been troubling me, it's been troubling me for so long, and I've almost lost track of the fact that I could feel anything different than despair. But yet I've done something like come to therapy, to see you, to talk with you. I think that it changes the orientation of, I want something different than what I'm experiencing, but I don't have it yet. Mm-hmm. And I think the more that we keep ourselves oriented toward hopefulness, then the more likely it is that we move in that direction. I could be in a really, really hopeful place and tragedy could strike, and that might shift my orientation to now like, what if I lose all of this? What if everything that's good in my life just crumbles and falls apart? And I think that orientation, that shift, it might begin to move us in that direction. And so I don't know if that's really the answer you were looking for, but I kind of view it as both are possible, but we're kind of looking at oriented to one or the other, and movement happens based on where we're oriented.
Yeah. That's, I completely agree with that. And I think that's significant for many reasons, the biggest of which is that means it's accessible, whichever direction we want is accessible kind of unconditionally, regardless of the situation that you're in.
Yeah.
Because you're saying, I could orient myself this way or that way. I can I can look at things, think about things, and even do things in a way that either moves me more in this direction or that direction, gives me more access and availability to this side of the spectrum or that side of the spectrum, or these several different spectra. And so I don't want to say it as simple as it's a choice, but I think it's available. There's a door there apparently that you can turn and look through, and should you do whatever you need to do to move through that door, that's a possibility. It's not that the door is locked or that the door is not even there. It's just a wall. And I think that is huge and probably at the backbone of all the work that we do in therapy.
Mm-hmm. I guess my question, oftentimes we get to this place of like, so practical application. Mm-hmm. So if all of this is present, if I can orient myself, if in some sense, if I can influence which way I'm looking, what does it look like, or what does it turn into when how do I actually move? If I find myself somewhere on that continuum that I don't want to be, how do I move to a different place? Mm-hmm.
I think if we think of it in the same way that we think of like hunger or something like that, yes, it's a pain or a discomfort that could very well be a sign you see as things are rough right now. For whatever reason, I'm stuck here hungry. I haven't had access to the food that I need, and I'm suffering. I'm hungry. I'm uncomfortable. I'm unhappy. And that could be a thing that you look at and say, look how disparaging this is. Look how awful this is. How did I get in this situation? This is terrible. I'm so hopeless. I'm so down. I'm so, all the things about this terrible situation. But you could also, I think, look at hunger as a reason to do something. I gotta find some food. I gotta do something. I gotta take this and use it as, this is a prompting of action. This is a reason for me to go do whatever it is that I need to do. I know I need to find the outcome I need is to eat. I got to make that happen somehow. I don't know what the answer to that is just yet, but let me go look around. Let me go talk to some people. Let me go figure out how do I pull together resources, put together whatever it is, borrow, ask, whatever. And I think that's a good illustration of the same circumstance could be taken very different ways. I think you just have to decide, I'm going to use this as a tipping point, as a prompt for action, a prompt for there's an outcome that I want, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to make that outcome happen, versus just the absence of the outcome that I would like, or the presence of some discomfort that I don't like, and that being it. And so I guess if we're converting this into very practical things, it's, are you going to do something about the hunger? Are you going to try to feed yourself? Are you going to decide that this hunger means I need to eat? So my outcome is I'm going to eat. I just got to fill in the pieces of how do I get there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of the things that does is it brings it back to a lot of the concepts that we've talked about before around, like, if I have a really clear view and of hope, it also informs what action I need to take in order to get there. Mm-hmm. And you use the example of hunger. If I have a hope that my belly can be full, then I start to assess, like, what do I know about myself that makes me know, like, I could find food, access food, get food. I could, and for different people, I think that might be different things, right? For some people, it might be like, oh, I know people, so I need to go connect with people. I need to go ask for people. Other people might be like, more analytically minded and say, like, okay, I'm going to assess where is food available? What are the means of getting food? What can I do to raise money so that I could go buy food? People might use their individual abilities differently, but all of those things are evidence of hope. I access who I am, and I say, how can I use who I am to move in a direction that is desirable for me, that is something that I want. And I think we've come back to this idea several times of, I have to first be really conscientious and thoughtful about, what do I want? And I think that's where I would say that's that orientation of, like, which way am I facing? And so I think that first step of orienting, where do I want to end up? Which direction do I want to be facing? And that then informs, well, what do you know about yourself that you need to use, that you need to utilize, that you need to access in order to kind of move in that direction? And that then moves then toward behavior. I think you could put, like, optimism might show up in those various stages of, like, okay, if I know this about myself, if I know that I have these abilities, I'm optimistic that I could actually end up where I want to. So I think optimism could overlap in those moments. But I think when you get to movement, to action, to behavior, you're squarely in the ground of hope. You've moved out of just pure optimism to now there's action, there's intention, there's behavior that goes into, I'm going to make this happen. Mm-hmm. And so I think that I don't want to throw optimism out and say it's not useful or it's not helpful. I think in that process of making hope actionable, optimism might play a very important role in, I feel good about this plan. I feel good about the possibilities of where this could lead. That might very well inform hope or feed hope or flame the fire of hope. And so I think both might be useful, but if we don't get to movement or action, optimism won't be enough.
Mm-hmm. I think built into all of that you described is initiation that is internally driven. This thing could be ignited, could start from inside of you, rather than wait for the situation to tell you, now you can start to hope for things. Now you have reason to be optimistic. Now you can set aside the doubt and the skepticism. And that, I think, is a very consequential thing. And hopefully that leads people, realizing that leads people to start to make more decisions like that. If you don't feel like you are in the place of moving towards where you want to be, all you can do is reorient yourself. All you can say is, well, I want to be on that path. So if I were on that path, what's in between me and where I want to go? Who do I need to talk to or ask for help from, or ask for advice from? What do I need to notice and acknowledge in myself, work on and build up in myself? Yeah, I think reorientation is a great way to describe that process of saying, whether it's conscious or subconscious, that I'm deciding to move toward what it is that I want.
Good. Anything else that you think that we need to touch on as far as this idea of optimism versus hope?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Well, hopefully that is a useful distinction. Hopefully that helps you to kind of think about what you want to achieve, where you want to end up, and what it might take in order to get there. If you know of anybody who would benefit from thinking about the connection between optimism and hope, please feel free to share this with them. That would mean a lot to us. In the meantime, make intentional decisions about where you're going to be oriented.